Welcome to Minority Viewpoint. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to attend a Black Latino Relations Conference at MSU. It was refreshing, and I commend all those involved. This is exactly the type of dialogue that we need to make change. And my first guest, Daniel Osuna, spoke of the similarities of the two groups, the Blacks and the Latinos. In today's program, I've invited him to be here to share some of those similarities with us. Daniel, welcome back to the program.
I'm glad to be back.
You were there at the conference, and you heard a lot of the exchange. Your presentation focused, again, like I said, on the similarities of the two groups. And I was really surprised at some of those similarities. I wasn't aware of them. And I think that it would really be good for the viewing audience who wasn't able to be there if you could share some of those similarities with us and the importance of knowing that.
Well, and I'll try, I'm sure I need to do this in a nutshell, right?
Oh, yeah, sort of.
Okay, to start with, I think it's important that we understand the reason that for the parallels, the reason to bring up the historical experiences of both the African community, the Chicano community, or the indigenous community, meaning even Northern Native American, is so that we understand our condition in the present situation as it has how we've gotten to this point historically. And there was a gentleman who said that we need to look at those historical points, but we need to move on from there. And so my reference to that was, yes, we need to look at them, and we also need to start from there. And because it's the point of reference in which we can find the commonalities in which we can build from. And some of the significant commonalities that I recall addressing was the fact that, because, and I need to explain this real quickly, is that I'm going to refer to America, and when I refer to America, I'm not necessarily referring to the United States. I'm referring to anyone that resides in the continent of the Western Hemisphere, because that was the Americas. And so when I refer to the Americas, I'm referring to the indigenous population, and when I refer to Africa, I'm referring to the indigenous populations of Africa. From those parallels, I mean, if we look at just historically the ancient civilizations in Egypt, and you had the pyramids of Egypt, you had the pyramids in Mexico. If we look at some of the things that took place during European invasions of both continents, at the same time Vasco da Gama was landing, you had people like Christopher Columbus landing in the Americas. Some of the other parallels as well, we had Africans being sold into slavery in the early 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s. You had the same thing happening in the Americas, in Mexico and other Central and South America. There were just as many slaves in the Americas as there were, and then they went on to transition into missions. So those, from a fundamental standpoint, start the parallels of where we need to focus from and where we need to look at as far as the struggles of our people and where they've come from to get to the point where they're at. Some of the other parallels that I moved forward to was more contemporary times, more some of the resistance. At the same time, maybe like the Fulani tribe or the Mandinka tribes of Africa were resisting some of the European invasions of the British and the French. The same tribes like the Inca and the Mexica were resisting, you know, some of the onslaughts of attacks of the British and the French at different places, but against the same people, you know, and approximately the same time. And to bring it to a contemporary standpoint, the same that there were things going on here in the United States for black struggle and black empowerment, the same types of struggle were going on for Chicano empowerment and indigenous empowerment. When you had periods where you had people like Nat Turner that led one of the major revolts of slavery in the United States, you had Juan Cheno Cortina that led some of the same revolts over the takeover of the Southwest by the United States. When you had the lynchings of blacks in the Black Belt South, where we always hear about the lynchings that took place, you had just as many or not more lynchings of Mexicanos and Native Americans in the Southwest simultaneously by some of the same people, but they were called different names. It may not have been the Ku Klux Klan, but it was the Texas Rangers, so, you know, where's the difference there? And those significantly, from a historical viewpoint, place us in a position so that we understand how we've paralleled to get to the point where we're at now.
In this particular conference with the students and some of the community leaders, you educated the entire group on this particular, on these points. Why in your presentation, why do you think that's important in terms of relationships now?
Real quickly, it goes back to the first point that I made. Unless it's as if though you take a mathematical calculation, if you start from the wrong point of reference, and even though you use all the correct calculations to get your answer, you're going to have the wrong answer because you didn't start at the correct reference point. So what I'm saying, unless we look at ourselves both as a people historically, how we are rooted in both of our continents and how we've come to the point of where we find ourselves together here in the United States, you know, sometimes at odds, sometimes competing for the same dollar, sometimes fighting each other and blaming each other for the results that are not coming from anything that we've created, but something that's been created and been put in that condition, then we're going to come up with the wrong answers for solutions for our people because we're not coming from the correct reference point.
You're new in the area, and well, you're here from Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
You came as a guest, and you walked into kind of in a nutshell, they gave you a picture of what's been going on campus and the perceived tension
Mm-hmm.
Between the Black and the Latino students. How does all of that history that you were talking about affect those tensions now, today? Or do they? And how does your presentation and the way you present everything, does it help?
Well, if you understand that the situation you're born into is not that way because that's the way it is, but you understand that you have been rendered in that condition through historical events, then you can, on a broader angle, look at the problem in which you're dealing with. And when you look on a broader angle, then it gives you more angles and a larger perspective in which to come up with solutions. When you look at your situation from a narrow point of view, as most students are doing and most people in our society do, because at the reference point without any historical understanding, then you come up with wrong solutions, and what you end up doing is you end up, those that you are criticizing for your conditions, you end up emulating them, you know, in your own actions. And what I'm saying is that we are a colonized people, so therefore we are dependent. So all of our actions come from a victim point of view and a dependency point of view. And as long as we do that, then we're not going to be looking towards ourselves to solve our problems, but we're going to look at other people to blame for our problems.
The element of trust, the question of trust came up, where the Latino student and the Black female student were saying, we can't work together because we don't trust each other. And their perception of it was that this is unavoidable. We can't get around this. Do you agree with that?
No. No, I don't, not at all. But understanding the developing stage of where students are at right now, and where many adults are at in our community, that they are taking the lead in quote-unquote our communities. Trust and respect aren't something that you can't give those to people unless you have them with yourself first. And so until people begin to grow and feel comfortable and respect themselves and trust themselves, then they can't extend those same ideas and ideals and values to any other human being. The whole reason we have the problems of division is because of a lack of respect. And that's out of an ignorance of lack of understanding of our situation. Again, we're caught up in a dependent situation where we're looking at other people to blame for a victim situation, and we live in a society that perpetuates a cumulative, in other words, there's not enough to go around syndrome, and which is totally untrue. There's more than enough to go around. But when we come from that, we always speak in reference to a piece of the pie, as though there aren't more pies on the table.
On that note, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. My guest today is Daniel Osuna, the International Secretary to El Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida. Daniel, for the people that didn't understand what I just said, what is the organization that you represent, and what are your objectives?
You mean what's the translation?
That too.
The little translation, the little...
That too.
That too. The little translation is the United Chicano-Mexicano Party. But now what it does is it's not quote-unquote a competitive political party, but it's just a political organization that operates within the framework of its community. It's a grassroots organization. And then it has many components of the organization. One of the components is its youth component that deals with youth and training them to become organizers to solve some of their conditions. You know, we'll ask youth, what are some of the problems in the community? And they'll tell us gang violence, drugs, you know, teenage pregnancy. Okay, who do you think is going to need to be responsible to solve some of those conditions? And they recognize that they are. So we train them to prepare them to be able to deal with those as they become young adults and go into the community.
We were talking in the first segment about this conference, the Black Latino Relations Conference, and I'd like to go back to that a little bit if I could. One of the other things that came out through the speakers' presentations and through the circle conversations that we had in the workshops, the themes of concern seem to be the perceptions and the images that media, the media portrays different ethnic people in, and the other was terminology, the way people are referred to collectively. The name of this program is obviously Minority Viewpoint, and I have had a struggle with the term because I see it as two parts. One, it's kind of a generational term. At the time that the program was named, that was the term that was used. Now we seem to be getting away from that, and it's seen as very derogatory. And I'm kind of caught in this struggle. Do I keep it or do I change it? I guess what I'd like you to do, and you kind of did this during the conference, was you addressed that, the whole issue of being labeled and why the term minority perhaps isn't the term to refer to use anymore, to refer to diverse groups of people. Or non-Anglos.
Meaning people of color. The challenge here is that we become so adamant about, we all as people to some degree are in an identity crisis. Again, because with Africans, they have been taken out of their homeland, brought here as slaves, so they found themselves through an ongoing struggle to identify within the system in which they find themselves. Us as indigenous people didn't come or weren't brought as slaves, but the land was taken away from us, and then many of us imposed on missions, becoming slaves in their own land. That question of a dominant society imposing its values and its identities of how it looks at you, how it deals with you, began the ongoing struggle of how we re-identify or try to find the root of who we are as a people in the confusion, because each generation is, in its development, is pushed towards assimilation and assimilating in dominant society versus having the rights to identify for their cultural differences. So not unlike the period of the late 60s where you had Afro-American. Now that's completely unheard of. It's African-American, and for many it's just African. For those at that time, terms were Mexican-American. That's mainly unheard of on a large part, or there still may be many elderly that are still calling themselves Mexican-American, but it's Chicano, or just Mexicano, which is dated back to minority creates another problem because, again, it's dealing with labeling that's not coming from us. And that's the fundamental key problem with the whole situation, is we're constantly under attack from dominant society deciding how they're going to categorize us as though we are these people that they are looking down on. Well, let's see, what category are we going to put them in now? And minority is in the dictionary a less than, in other words, so underclass was one that was used predominantly. Second class citizens was used predominantly. All different types. So minority falls into that same category. The challenge that we need to look at is if we do not agree with the terms that are given to us, they're not going to change by us waiting for that dominant society to decide what they think is best for us. as the same way we don't like the way we're portrayed in movies, it's not going to change until we change it, until we as community people decide the terms that we feel comfortable with, that we decide to use, and we impose those for ourselves for that identification. As many have returned to utilizing the term Chicano because it is indigenous, it's the root of who those people are, versus using Hispanic.
If you could explain the difference between the term Chicano and Hispanic. In this position, I have the constant challenge of trying to figure out the correct term in which to refer individuals, whether it's gay or the preferred word is lesbian, or whether it's African American or they prefer black, or whether it's Hispanic or they prefer Mexican American. And so it helps, I think, other people to know the origination of the term Chicano and what it is exactly Hispanic developed out of, and what its original purpose was.
The original term Chicano comes from the indigenous tribe called the Mexica, M-E-X-I-C-A. Most people know them as the Aztecs, but the Mexica referred to themselves as Mexicano, M-E-X-I-C-A-N-O. The X had the sh sound in the Nahuatl language, which was the language of most of those indigenous people. As Spanish rule took over, the X took on the silent J, being Mexicano, and they called their children of the earth, Chicano, X-I-C-A-N-O. So when a person is referring to themselves as Mexicano or Chicano, they are referring to themselves from the indigenous root of who they are as a people, and basically, you know, shedding off any other labeling that had come their way, such as Mexican American, such as Latin American, such as, you know, Spanish surnames, such as whatever the cases may be, and then all the derogatory terms that went with that, beaner, you know, and the variety of others, you know, that I can, wetback, you know, illegal alien, so to speak. The origins of the term Hispanic, and this is real important, because Hispanic came out of the Nixon administration and out of that period when civil unrest was at a height in the Black Power struggle, in the Chicano Power movement, and they needed a way to make the masses of people feel like as though they had made some inroads and they were being accepted into mainstream society. So Hispanic came up as an all-encompassing, okay, we are thinking about you, we are coming up with programs for you, and then this is the term that we're going to be utilizing. In fact, Time magazine in 1978 had a big thing, the decade of the Hispanics, you know, which Hispanic is totally European in origin, which has nothing to do with the original peoples that were here.
We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. Unfortunately, our time is up. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here and do the special taping.
Okay.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.